Hello, my name is Porter Anderson. I'm the editor-in-chief at Publishing Perspectives. We're delighted to have you with us in this special presentation today from the Sheikh Zayed Book Award in Abu Dhabi. I'm very excited to bring our guests to you. We have Sawad Hussain from Cambridge. We have Robert Morgan from Toronto. I'm in Tampa. We've just been comparing the weather and we are in vastly different places as we were discovering. You're welcome, and we're very pleased about our subject today because, of course, the Sheikh Zayed Book Award is one of the premier prizes in the world, working in its 15th year now. We're pleased with the program. We're looking forward to what's coming up in the 2020 round. Let me read you, if I may, a few notes just to orient you in case you're not familiar with the Zayed Award. The Sheikh Zayed Book Award annually awards outstanding literary and scholarly works written in Arabic or engaging with Arabic culture. Each year, prizes are awarded by an independent jury to authors, translators, publishers, and organizations around the world. There are 9 categories. They range from children's literature and an award for young author. That's a one that I like very much. To another category called translation to Arabic culture in other languages, something that we'll be talking about. Each winner receives 750,000 UAE dirhams. That's in British money about 160,000 pounds. In the United States, that's about $204,000. This is one of the richest and most generous prizes in the world. Submissions for the 15th edition are still open for a few more days. You have until Thursday, October 1. So we're here in a very timely way, I think. For more information on making your submissions, the address is zayedaward.ae. Something else we'll be talking about, I'll just give you a slight bit of background on right now, is the Sheikh Zayed Translation Grant. It was launched in 2018, and it helps produce more quality Arabic books that are translated, published and distributed outside the Arab world. One of the best parts of the translation grant is that it supports marketing and distribution to get the work to the audience as well as simply to have it translated and published. Applications for that grant are open year-round for international publishers interested in applying. And again, if you need more information on this, the place to go is zayedaward.ae. Now, let me start us off in our conversation this morning. And we'll be available later during the day if you need to drop me an email and ask about anything that you did not get to ask at the end of our session today. It's porter@publishingperspectives.com. Don't hesitate to send me a note. Sawad and Robert are going to start us off by giving us a little bit of a background on what they do, what their particular roles in this are. Sawad is a translator primarily. Robert is a publisher in Toronto. Sawad, will you start us off and tell us how you came to do your work and what you're doing?
Yes, sure. So, obviously, I'm really glad to be here to discuss this topic of Arabic literature and translation. It's a passion of mine for the past 10 years. I started out as a literary translator primarily because I'm not a native speaker of Arabic. So I fell in love with the Arabic language and its literature. And originally, my whole sort of, focus was trying to dispel stereotypes that people have of Arabs or people who speak Arabic on the African continent. But as I've progressed in my career, I've come to realize it's more just about bringing great literature from one part of the world to another part of the world and letting stories across borders. In my career, I have focused primarily on female authors, just because I tend to gravitate more towards writing by females. And also I like to focus on authors who have been, I wouldn't say marginalized, but more so are like not as celebrated within the Arabic literary sphere. So either authors writing in Arabic, on the African continent. So that could be from South Sudan, Eritrea, Mauritania, or authors writing from countries in the Middle East whose literary output isn't usually in the front and center of the Arabic literary sphere. So that's like, I've been working on books from Yemen and Oman, which prior to the Man Booker International Prize that Marilyn Booth and Jocha Harthi won, like Oman really wasn't on the map for anybody. So that's pretty much me. And I work mainly with literature for adults, but also in the past 4 years or so, I've started doing more work for children and young adults.
Fantastic. You're working in comics and graphics too, I think, graphic novels.
Yes, yeah.
This is fascinating, and it's a wonderful side of the culture that we're not seeing as much of in terms of literary work yet. So I'm glad that you're doing that. Let me follow with one more point to what you're saying. Talking about women's work, I have been interested to hear Marilyn Booth was talking to me, as you were saying. She was the translator who won the International Booker last year for Joka's book. What Marilyn was telling me was that people are not outside of the Arab world, are not aware of how many women are writing in the Arab world. There's a huge body of material created by women, and yet we often are surfacing men's work more frequently. What drives that? Is that just tradition? Is it simply a matter, as it is in so many parts of the world, of male domination, or is there something else involved there?
So, I mean, I think you've definitely hit the nail on the head, that visibility of Arab women authors, not only in Arabic, but also translated into English, doesn't reflect the, sheer number of women writing in Arabic these days. I think that the issue stems from the fact that, unfortunately, I think a lot of the people who are in the position of, deciding who gets airtime, for example, on, TV shows. So like a few months ago, just because I'm obsessed with Arab women authors, I was just making a list of literary interviews, from different channels that I was going to post online. So for example, TV5 has a Arabic stream, and BBC SoundCloud also has a specific program with Arab literatures, and there's also different shows in Egypt and the Emirates and Sudan, which have, there's a really rich sort of TV programming for specifically talking to novelists in the Arab world in Arabic. But going to all those shows, what I noticed is that there's 3 times, it's not quantitative, study that I've done, but anecdotally, I would just say there's 3 times as much as, male authors on these shows than female authors. And so I think that sort of leads to so that's one thing. And then the people in the publishing houses publishing Arabic, unfortunately, perhaps are not putting as many women authors forward for prizes as they could be, right? So usually as a house, you can only choose 1 or 2 to put forward for the IPAF. And then as a result, the trickle effect is that in English, when I'm pitching books to editors, they're like, okay, so what's the media presence of this author? Have they been nominated for any prizes? And unfortunately, because from the get-go, the Arab women are not getting the platform. When I'm trying to pitch them to editors in English, editors are more likely to go with male authors because they have more of a media presence, on television or radio, or their books have been more reviewed in newspaper outlets. So I think it's more so, it's kind of just all comes together. And unfortunately, this is an issue, I think, across many languages, but it seems to be quite pronounced in Arabic literature and translation, I would say. Yeah,
it becomes that chicken or egg problem. If you can't get the media visibility, they're not willing to pick you up, but you can't get the media visibility if they don't pick you up. I understand that there's a parallel in the North American culture that the VITA organization has brought to light for us, in which women are not nearly as well covered by the media, nor are the media putting as many women into the positions that do the coverage. There are far more men writing about literature than there are women. And that one of the things they finally discovered, which I was glad to see they went as far as this, was that many publishers are simply not presenting as many women's books to the news media to consider. And so up and down the whole chain there, the whole, if you will, the supply chain of review and visibility, there are points that need work. And it's great to see all of this come to light, because then we can actually address it as you're talking about. Great, thank you. Now, Robert, will you speak to us a little bit about the work that you're doing in Toronto at Bookland, your press?
Yes, hello and greetings from beautiful Toronto, Canada. I would like to welcome our online viewers from North America, the United Arab Emirates, Europe, and around the world to this exciting event. I hope you will find this panel discussion useful, engaging, and enjoyable. And I very much look forward to sharing my views on Arab's literature and translation with you. I also would like to thank Publishing Perspectives and the Sheikh Zayed Book Award for inviting me to be a part of this online session. I'm very happy and honored to be one of the speakers today, along with my distinguished colleagues. Just a few words about me. I have been a publisher of Bookland Press since 2006, so a fairly long time. In addition, I have accumulated over 20 years of experience in this field working as a book publisher and publishing business consultant. During that time, I have successfully managed many complex publishing projects in North America and internationally. On a more personal note, I'd like to say that I have a passion for publishing books written by culturally diverse authors and Indigenous authors, both from Canada and from around the world. My personal interests in book publishing range from contemporary poetry to fiction, books for young readers, and of course, translations. I'm particularly interested in literature that is different, that is exciting, and that show us different aspects of the world that we have not noticed before. This is one of the main reasons we have acquired two Sheikh Zayed Book Award winning books. One is Headless, and another one is I Dream of Being a Concrete Mixer. I hope we'll have time to talk a little bit more about these books later in the session, but we'll see how it goes. During my time at Bookland Press, I have established a comprehensive translation program for both Canadian authored and foreign authored books. One of our recent publishing projects, the translation of Governor General Award-winning children's book, Mary the Lifesaver, will be released as a major movie in 2021, so we are super excited about it. As a book publisher, I personally believe that the books we publish are expressions of who we are, the values we hold, and the choices we make to reach our goals. At Bookland Press, we have claimed our part of the literary landscape by attracting, selecting, publishing, and promoting some of the most exciting and creative writers and translators of our times. Inspired by the enduring magic and importance of literature, my publishing objective has always been to create, publish, and promote exceptional books that are instantly recognizable by book readers in Canada, North America, and around the world for the creativity, spirit, and literary value. I personally believe it's our responsibility as book publishers to make every book we publish a book of high value and worth.
This is great. I had a thought that perhaps we should turn this into a pitch session and allow Sawad to simply offer you her best material right now. Because it is
I know, I was
interesting.
like, how do I not know Robert? I was like, all the stuff he's saying, like, this is great.
Perfect. It's perfect. Everything you want to offer, Robert wants to publish. So I think this is a perfect match, Izzy. I was actually picking up in some of this when we were doing our pre-work before the session.
You had this idea from the beginning, right?
Yes, I did. There's a trick to this, you see. We've captured you. Yes.
Contacting Robert afterwards.
There you go. No, it is fascinating, Robert. I noticed that your list is very eclectic, which is wonderful. And one of the things that, in fact, let's move to our first main point. We want to talk about key challenges and opportunities. And I know that one of the things that you're talking to us about that's so valuable in my mind and what you're doing at Bookland is work in Indigenous Canadian material, because there are the First Nations that are producing such wonderful, creative, exciting work. It's, in a sense, it's a parallel, if you will, to the Arabic world, with the kind of bracing and reaching and multicultural internally nature of the First Nations, the Indigenous world. You're embracing that in your publishing house, as well as so many other things. Would you say, Robert, that the culture in which you work, the Canadian culture, has an inherent sense of multiculturalism that enables you to be the ranging press that you are? Is it of help that the society is receptive to this?
Well, in Canada, we pride ourselves in our cultural diversity. And we consider multiculturalism as an integral part of our society. The books we publish at Bookland Press, they do reflect this point of view. It's as simple as that. Canada is a fully bilingual country with 2 official languages, English and French. And Bookland Press publishes in both of these languages, which creates many opportunities for translation projects.
In fact, I think, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think that the concrete mixer, I Dream of Being a Concrete Mixer, you're taking into both French and English, correct?
Yeah,
from the Zayed Award.
Both languages, that's correct.
That's very exciting. And it's great that you can actually do this in the same house because you can give it the treatment that you know it needs. That's perfect.
That was the original plan. So as we all know, there are over 120 million people in the world who speak Arabic and make it one of the 5 most spoken languages in the world. Obviously, it's very important, vast and culturally rich market. Bringing translated literature from different parts of the world, including the Arab world in particular, to Canada and North American market gives Bookland Press important opportunities to introduce Canadian and North American readers, as well as tens of millions of English-speaking and French-speaking book readers around the world, to creative and talented contemporary Arab authors who, in all fairness, until relatively recently, were largely unknown in the English-speaking and French-speaking markets. And I also want to make another very important point that by publishing translated books from the Arab world, we are able to introduce North American readers to new voices, fresh perspectives, and innovative ideas. I believe that bringing translated literature from the Arab world and other countries to the North American market enriches our own literature and our own culture. It also helps us tremendously to address the need for diversity in our own society. I have always believed that literature is one of the most effective ways of sharing experiences between people who speak different languages and are of different cultural backgrounds. I see publication of Arab literature through translation as a way for American and Canadian readers to discover, learn about, and connect with the new culture. I also see it as a way to help Arab Canadians and Arab Americans to stay connected to their culture, and as a way to promote and enable the intergenerational transmission of Arab culture and language, which I believe is very important.
Let me ask a follow-up question here. Knowing that you're working the North American market almost as a unit, can you tell a difference in how receptive the American audience is to the translation you bring in from Arabic compared to Canada? Is there resistance that you feel in the States? I may not like the answer to this, but I think it's important to ask it.
I can only speak for the Canadian market, and I would say that more and more Canadians are becoming more open to reading literature from different parts of the world.
And you're not selling into the States then, is that correct?
We do.
You do?
We do. Ingram handles most of the sales, but like we live in Toronto.
Right.
Toronto is considered one of the most multicultural cities in the world. There are approximately 200 different ethnic groups living in Toronto, and believe it or not, over 140 languages are spoken here.
Incredible.
As a result of these demographics, there is a growing interest and demand for international translations in our market. There is no ifs or buts about it. It's a simple fact.
Right, which is
growing demand obviously drives sales. As a book publisher, I see significant market opportunity for publishing modern Arab authors in North America. I see an increasing interest in more modern Arab literature from ordinary Canadians. I see it from book readers, from book distributors, librarians, book retailers, you name it. So
No, I can say to you from the United States that we do see more and more interest in translated work, which is fantastic because for many years the States was considered quite resistant to work from other cultures. I think that our politics have actually helped this in an ironic backflip, if you will. People have become concerned about the isolationism and the nationalism they may feel here, and they're actually looking for more from other parts of the world, which is great. I think there is probably less resistance specifically to Arabic work in the States than there is just to general work from outside the world. So as everything loosens up, as everyone becomes more accepting of wider and broader literature, I think we're going to see more and more opportunities for Arabic literature to be translated and sold very well into the United States, which is exciting. It's an important thing to see happen. So thank you. Sawad, talk to me a little bit. When you look at both challenges and opportunities right now, what do you see? What is, from the translator's viewpoint, what sticks out in your mind as perhaps one of the biggest stumbling blocks you're running into?
So, as a translator, I'd definitely say funding is
Mm-hmm.
a huge issue for Arabic. I'm just laughing because it's like in my head, it's like funding, funding, funding. Like anybody, it's just like it's. Um,
We've got a
as a,
sign for you to hold up.
yeah, exactly. Compared to a lot of my colleagues working from other languages, say Korean or Swedish, translating into English, whose countries have a very robust infrastructure to supporting, literature and translation and seeing the benefit of it. Unfortunately, the opportunities for funding for Arabic to English literary translators, I honestly can just count on one hand. I'm aware of the Sheikh Zayed Book Award, and that has to be the winner who gets funded.
Right.
Then the IPAF, International Prize for Arabic Fiction, again, it has to be
Exactly.
the winner is the only one that gets funded.
And of course,
Then
the
I'm
IPAF,
aware,
I believe, chooses one book per year as its winner. So it's not,
yeah,
there are not as many categories available for translation grants as well as at the Zayed.
exactly, as the
Yep.
Sheikh Zayed Book Award. And as you
Right,
said,
right.
like the Sheikh Zayed Book Award doesn't just give funding for the translation, it also does it for the marketing, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is a really key difference,
Yeah,
right, with
exactly.
the IPAF.
Yep.
And then there's the Sharjah Book Fair, gives funding to a publisher if they come to Sharjah. And but unfortunately, a lot of publishers who I had tried to convince in the past to come to Sharjah for that, and if they don't have a vested interest in Arabic literature and translation as a big part of their list, they didn't seem so keen to come all the way just for one book to sign the contract and get the funding. So
Well, we'll have to
that's,
work on them then. It's a marvelous
yeah,
trip and they should go. Yeah,
exactly.
we all love being in charge, of course.
And then the fourth one, which I've recently become aware of, which I had originally found out because it's the same. So there's the Anglo-Omani Society in
Mm-hmm.
London, which had provided Marilyn Booth her grant to do her translation of Celestial Bodies. So I'm aware that they accept applications for, grants for Omani books specifically that they would consider if you're looking to do a sample. Yeah, so that's like a key issue in terms of whenever I'm pitching something. Obviously for publishers it's much easier, as I'm sure Robert would agree, that if a book comes with funding, you're much more likely to publish it as opposed to if it doesn't. And so that's the key issue. And then two other issues which I've
But
come across.
before we move
Yeah.
on though, let me bring up one very good suggestion you made as we were talking earlier
Mm.
before our session. Wouldn't it be good if, in addition to the winners in a given category that are available for translation grants, if maybe the short list was available? In other words, raising up the potential for more books moving through the system of a great award program to attract funding and attract publishers with funding rather than just the winner.
Yes, definitely. Like, for example, Bathena Al Isa's Haris Al-Satah was on the shortlist this year for young authors for the Sheikh Zayed Book Award. And I was really hoping that she would win because, I'm already working on like a sample for that, but,
Wow.
She didn't. And so when we were talking earlier, I thought that if, that could be a possibility, is having funding for the entire shortlist, or perhaps putting it to the public and asking them, okay, from these, 5 books, which one would you like to see in translation? Just having the public vote on it. And then the committee could perhaps give funding to the winner and one more book from the shortlist. So I think, yes, the Sheikh Zayed Book Award is definitely doing what needs to be done. But unfortunately, because not many other people are giving funding, like more needs to be done. And yeah.
Good point, and a good suggestion. Certainly, if books are getting to the shortlisted stage in these great competitions, they're clearly worthy of translation consideration. And so I think it would be marvelous if more such funding becomes available. And I'm sorry, I stopped you there. You had another point I think you were going to make about challenges.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So I was also going to say, in terms of, so for example, there's not many agents representing Arab authors. So currently the agency which I would say is at the helm of the field is Raya agency, run by Yasmina Jistrati, which is has done a superb job of placing Arab authors with big publishing houses. And aside from her, I'm only aware of like a few other authors, such as like Sawad Sanusi or Ahmed Sa'dawi, who are represented by English agencies. But aside from Raya agency, I would just say the field is ripe for anybody to really come in and start their own agency to represent Arab authors, because understandably, Yasmina is from Lebanon, and so the majority of her list tends to be from the Levant of authors that she's representing. But there's like a huge, gap for the Gulf. Someone could come in and represent Gulf authors. Someone could come in and represent authors writing in Arabic from the African continent. So I was just discussing this with a friend of mine the other day, but unfortunately, as Arab authors don't have much representation, they're not getting the same sort of opportunities as other authors, their counterparts working from other languages. And so then the onus falls upon the translator to be the agent, which I think happens in a lot of languages which are seen as, I don't want to use the word minority, but perhaps, not as mainstream as like French, German, or Spanish. And so it's really difficult to be a translator from Arabic when there's no funding, when you're doing all this extra work that an agent is doing for free. So, you're translating interviews, you're like translating paperwork, and it's something that I love, which is why I'm still doing it. But all I'm just saying is that there's still a lot to be done in order to encourage more Arabic literature in translation, because there's so much of it that is yet to be translated, including classics. Marilyn Booth says this all the time. There's so many great works from the 1950s and 60s and 70s, which are just yet to come into English. Case in point, one of my recent releases, so I'm talking so fast because I'm just really passionate about this.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Which was Baba Saha by Sahar Khalife, which has just come out in around April, the height of the pandemic. It's called Passage to the Plaza in English, published by Siegel Books. So it was written 30 years ago. Within 5 years, it was translated into German, Dutch, French, a few Asian languages such as Bahasa Indonesia, like Korean. It took 30 years to make it into English, and it's been on university syllabi. Like, why is this? Why is the English world so slow on the uptake? It was just ridiculous. And so when I found out that her book was yet to be translated, and that's like a text that I studied in university, I just assumed it was in English. I was just flabbergasted. So, yeah.
It's a very beautiful publication too. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
You must be very excited about it. It's great.
Yes.
Let me catch up. We're starting to get some questions from our audience, and I don't want to wait too long before we get to them so that we don't run out of time. Robert, one of our folks who's watching is asking, this is someone talking to us, from Street Noise Books, a publisher in Brooklyn, one of our American publishers, asking who distributes your books. I think you mentioned Ingram. And how do you get your books out there, as we say? What do you do to promote them?
Okay, so Bookland Press is part of the Literary Press Group of Canada. Some of you might heard of them. I'm sure, Porter, you have.
Yeah.
A Literary Press Group of Canada, it's a collective of about 50 Canadian-owned publishers, and we have our own distribution company called LitDisco, which stands for Literary Distribution Company. So we own the books that are in warehouses, and it's a collective approach. And we have very effective distribution system. And throughout Canada, we have representative and the network of warehouses. Through the US, it mostly goes, excuse me, it mostly goes through Ingram. That's how it gets to the US. And surprisingly, even some book orders from Canadian retailers, they also come from US through Ingram by some weird reason that I'm not gonna get into, especially library markets. So Late Disco is our distributor. They specialize in distribution of Canadian titles, literary titles, and pretty efficient, very good.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you for that. Let me get one here for you, Sawad, too. I love this question because I'm fascinated by the multiplicity of dialects inside the Arabic world, something that we don't think of from the outside. Do you translate different Arabic dialects, and what kind of challenges does this present to a translator?
Yes, definitely. I think a majority of translators working from Arabic inevitably are working, with a wide range of dialects, unless they have consciously made the decision to only translate Egyptian dialect, Masri or Shami. But yeah, so the way, for example, the book I did of Saouda Sanusi, it's called Fi'aran Ummi Hissa, which is translated as Mama Hissa's Mice. It's a Kuwaiti novel. So prior to translating that novel, I watched, hours upon hours of Kuwaiti soap operas, just because I had not lived in Kuwait myself. And I have a few Kuwaiti friends, but I wasn't as well versed in that dialect as, I speak Shem. Like I studied in Jordan. That's, the sort of dialect that I am used to speaking, and which is spoken in like Palestine, Syria, the Levant. So definitely, I would say any translator has to undergo a good amount of preparation if you're taking on a book from a different region, and that's currently what I'm doing. I'm working on a Yemeni book, and so I've just been asking a lot of questions about that. But luckily, with everything online these days, watching TV shows, or they have different online dialect dictionaries. There's a lot of things that I think makes it easier for Arabic to English translators than it was in the past.
Mm-hmm. You have just come up with the best excuse I think I've ever heard for watching soap operas.
Yes, yeah.
We're on to you now. Kuwaiti soap operas. I've never even seen one. I have to see one.
They're on Netflix.
Fantastic.
Yeah. There were sometimes if you were interested. Yeah.
And it's actually a very clever way to work too. I know that many people actually study English watching television from Britain and from the United States. Makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. Let's go to one of our own planned points here, because I do want to make sure we touch on this, and then we have some other good questions coming in as well. Talk to me a little bit about young people's work. Sawad, what do you find are the pressure points, the difficulties, the needs there? And I'm fascinated. Is it called Shadow Heroes?
Yes.
The workshop that you do that works in comics and graphic novels, as I was mentioning. Talk to us a bit about this. Is it as big as it sounds? It sounds like it's an enormous sector of the literature at this point.
So, well, I think you've mentioned a few things. So Shadow Heroes is actually the name of a collective which was established by Gitanjali and I think, her last name is Patel, and Sophie Lewis, which goes into secondary schools in the UK to encourage young people to think about translation in a different way, and that the intersections of translation with different subjects and how it can actually be like a life skill, and how it's not only based about language really. And so through that collective, a colleague, Nariman Yusuf, and I have been going into schools and teaching a workshop on Arabic comics. Wow. And which has been really great. The reception has been wonderful. It's been a really fun workshop to teach. We've been, using as the main source a web comic by Dina Muhammad called Qahira, which is about this superhero who wears a hijab, who goes around Cairo, basically fighting the patriarchy, really is what it comes across as. And as part of the workshop, we also introduce students to comics from, Lebanon, Algeria, Egypt. And so there is a really rich corpus of comics in the Arab world. They also have many comic festivals I don't think there's as much of it coming into English as it could be. There are also a lot of graphic novels, and so that's with regards to comics. And you were saying the pressure points. I would say what I've noticed is, unfortunately, there's not as much young people's literature celebrated in the Arab world, I would say, with regards to prizes, as it is in the English speaking world. I'm only aware of, the Sawad prize. And then I think the Sheikh Zayed Book Award also has an award for young people's literature.
Right. In
But
fact, both young people's literature and the young author award,
and the young
which I
author,
like.
although the young
Yeah.
authors are actually, like, I think in their 30s. So
Well, exactly. That's pretty
yeah.
young, believe me.
Yeah.
For some of us, Sawad.
Yeah. So what I was just going to say is that, so that's the pressure point, in that now I've seen, like, from publishing houses, there's been more of a push to have, instead of just translating stories from English for children into Arabic, by encouraging authors, and when I say recently, I mean like the past 5 to 10 years, of having actual stories written originally in Arabic for, children speaking the Arabic language. And then another issue, is also a sort of transition that's happening, is that I've noticed before, there used to be this, every sort of YA novel or children's story used to have like a lesson or a morals really in your face. It became very like didactic sort of literature, as opposed to just, children's literature where there's a lesson maybe embedded secretly, or there's no lesson at all, and it's just like a fun story. So I think a lot of the times when I was trying to pitch children's literature, publishers would just be like, well, this is too in your face. Like, it's not that, we don't have it that way in children's literature in English, where it's like, respect your parents, or, be kind to animals or something. Like, a lot of the time there's a way you can write a story where it's not so, just there.
Sure, it's more subtle.
Yeah, exactly. So I found recently, in the past 2 to 3 years, that YA books, because I primarily focus, I don't do, so many picture books. I haven't done a picture book. I do YA novels, are more there have been more workshops for authors writing in Arabic, writing YA novels. So for example, Fatima Sharifuddin, like, she's a really prolific author of YA novels. She's Lebanese. And I know a number of authors have attended her workshops, and as a result, come out with their own publications, which have then been picked up by publishers. So I think there's a sort of a wave of, YA literature, which is coming out, which is perhaps easier to pitch to publishers.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I know that one of the things that I feel works the best in some other cultures outside the Arab world is simply reading what the Arab world is reading, rather than the sort of pedagogical approach of this is what the Arab world is. And as you're saying, not so much throw a lesson at them, but simply say, this is what your peers are reading in another part of the world, another huge, wonderfully complex culture and cultural mix like the Arab world. I think that's a marvelous way to start catching on to who is out there in the world. And for young people, that's the exciting discovery, of course. What are people thinking who are my age, who are thinking as I'm thinking? How does it feel to them? It's a wonderful trend. So I'm glad that's what you're seeing. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Robert, oh, I'm sorry, you had another point there?
No, sorry. I was just going to jump in really quickly and say that even YA novels translated from Arabic into English, like, the main reason I actually got into it is there are a lot of people learning the Arabic language who struggle to read a novel, right? So if you have a YA novel where you can read the Arabic alongside the English, so it's not only just for children, but I found a number of like older students in universities use YA novels in Arabic with the English alongside as a study tool. So it's also, I think, extends to adults. Yeah, because as I was saying, it's very difficult for a student of the Arabic language to, suddenly jump to a novel. It's easier to have something in between, a sort of middle reader. So I've found a lot of people have been reading Ghadi and Rawan who are 18, 19, when it's actually aimed for 11 to 13-year-olds.
Yeah. That's a great technique. That's very interesting, and it makes perfect sense. Robert, I am interested because I noticed when I started learning about Bookland and what you're doing in Toronto, you're not based as a children's publisher per se, and yet your two acquisitions so far from the Sheikh Zayed Award have been books for children. Atlas and I Dream of Being a Concrete Mixer. Speak to us a little bit about the position of children's, young people's literature in your press and in how you see Arabic coming into the Canadian culture.
Well, there is a very good reason for Bookland Press to start seriously looking into children's books and young adult literature. Let's take a closer look at the market segment for books for young readers in Canada, and you will understand what I'm talking about. Let's say I'd like to start with a few numbers related to the Canadian book market, like a general overall Canadian book market. So according to BookNet Canada, and the BookNet Canada is an agency that tracks the book sales throughout Canadian book market. In 2019, there were about 54 million books have been sold in Canada. Now let's take a look at the market share for different categories, which I find fascinating. Total 2019 sales of books for young readers accounted for the majority of the Canadian market share. It's just over 40%.
Oh, wow.
I'm not joking. The majority of the Canadian book sales are books for young adults and children, young adult and children's books. 40%. I think it's like 40.1, 40.2, but let's just stick with
Close
40.
enough. Yeah.
Nonfiction books came in second place with roughly 34% of the market share, well below children and young adult books. And fiction came in the third place at 24%, which was shocking to me because until very recently, most of the books we published were fiction. And we see the shrinking market share for the fiction books and the dramatic rise of young adult literature in the market share. So that's in the English-speaking Canadian market, but we publish in both languages, English and French. So let's look at the numbers on the French Canadian market on the French language side. Surprisingly, the picture is very similar. In the French Canadian market, books for young readers also had the biggest portion of sales in 2019. They accounted for roughly 39% of the trade market, which was shocking for many people, including myself. And what was even more interesting, because the English market and French market in Canada are usually different, but it looks like the readers finally agree on one thing. It's about 40% on one side and 39% on the other side. So this is as a publisher, you have to watch those numbers and you have to look at those trends. And I believe these numbers are clear and they clearly understand how important children's and young adult literature book segment is important for the Canadian market.
Very interesting. It certainly explains what you're doing in your acquisitions. I understand perfectly. Yeah, you're doing the right thing, Robert. That is incredible. I am especially interested in the fact that the French language part of Canada and the English language part are so similarly
finally agreed on something.
Yeah, finally, you can say that. No, that is really interesting, and the position of nonfiction is fascinating. Do you see much nonfiction for children and for young people in the States? We're getting a great deal of that.
We're getting a little bit of that. Until recently, nonfiction for children was almost non-existent, and in the market share was in single digits. Let's see what this year brings us. And this year can bring us a lot of things. So let's wait and see when the numbers come in, and we'll take a closer look. But again, the numbers speak louder than words, and this is certainly the market segment we all should be looking at as book publishers and translators and literary agents and if you want to be, or if somebody wants to be in the fastest growing market segment in the Canadian market, you should be looking for literature for young adults and children.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sawad, one of our audience members is asking, do certain Arabic literary genres have more potential in translation in general? It's interesting we're talking about young people's work, because I think often we focus on that. My interest in politics tells me quite frequently that it's the adults who need to read other cultures in the world. The children aren't causing nearly as much trouble as the adults are. What do you find in terms of traditionally purposeful genres that are going to work well as translation comes into consideration?
So what I have noticed is that, and I'm just speaking, with about American and UK publishing houses. I haven't worked with Canadian or Australian ones, but editors have a very specific view or understanding of what they want from the Arab world, and it's usually some sort of multi-generational sweeping epic, taking into consideration the country's history and culture and food. It's not usually that they just want a piece of literature, as we discussed earlier, as just a piece of literature. Usually, so the sort of genre they're looking for is, sort of like historical fiction, or something which basically is saying like, this is Iraq or this is Yemen, as opposed to, for example, and I'm just talking because it's just coming to the conversation. This short story collection I have coming out in January by Shahla Ujaili is called A Bed for the King's Daughter. It won the Al-Multaqa Prize for short stories, which is, the only prize in the Arab world for short story collections. So if you consider the amount of entries that they would have had, and of all of those entries, she won it. No editor wanted to pick up the collection, some microfiction collection, so very, very short stories. Some stories are only half a page, because it was too experimental, wasn't grounded enough in the Arab world. You can't really tell this is Arabic literature. There's no like reference to, Arab food in it, etc. So it's more so an experimental collection, again, tearing down the patriarchy. This seems to be a trend in the works that I'm working on, as you can tell. It's the second time I've said this, as well as a socio-political critique on, yes, sometimes Syria, but other times not. And so the press that ended up picking that up was University of Texas Press, and that's simply because the editor, Dina, I have to, give her a shout out, is because she didn't want something which was, prescriptive and saying that this is the Arab world. It's more so like, this is a great piece of literature. This piece has been celebrated in the Arab world. It should make you think like, why was it celebrated? And even if it doesn't suit our tastes, you should perhaps consider publishing it to see what readers will think of it. So it was just really interesting for me to see that something which was so celebrated was having such difficulty coming into English. And having said that, I was speaking earlier, I think last week, at a science fiction, speculative fiction conference about Arabic translation and Arabic literature. And what came to light is the same thing, is that it's very difficult to get science fiction from Arabic into English, because it's not what people are expecting. You're not expecting some sort of, I did a Jordanian novel. One of my first novels was a Jordanian novel called Heaven on Earth, which is a speculative fiction novel based in Jordan, by a press in Hong Kong, are the ones who ended up publishing it, because again, nobody wanted a science fiction novel based in Jordan. They're like, what does it tell us about Jordan? We don't really care about this story happening in 2090. So unfortunately, I think there is a really rich, body, again, of science fiction Arabic literature, but it's just not coming across. So I think, and it sounds like I'm bashing a lot of editors here. I'm sorry. All I'm trying to say is that people need to
it's good to have this.
They just need to expand their horizons and open their minds as to what is coming from the Arab world, and maybe, take a chance to don't think that your readers only want the next Chimamanda Adichie, but instead from Arabic. Do you get what I'm saying? Like this is, or
Oh, exactly.
JC's Homegoing, but an Arabic version of that. There's so much more there. And I think, like even Frankenstein in Baghdad, like it won the IPAF, but I don't think if it hadn't won it, that it would have gotten the same publicity as it did, because it is science fiction, and it's really unusual for a science fiction title to get that publicity.
It is quite a standout in that regard. I agree. And one thing Marilyn and I were saying about Joka's book, of course, is that it was a perfectly marvelous book. It's a perfectly marvelous translation, but without the benefit of the International Booker, it would not have come to light as it did. Yeah. And this is an important thing for us to keep in mind, because again, it tells us how much the Sheikh Zayed is doing too. Any of these programs to help bring these things up, surface this work and get it into visibility as well as they do is so important. I want to pick up on one point you were making to me earlier too, about how in many publishing houses, I know you're not trying to bash editors, but because we
discover y'all.
No, you were very sensitive about this. You were saying one of the problems is that a lot of publishing houses just don't have a good Arab reader on hand. There's no one who can really work with Arabic and say, this is a really good piece. It may be science fiction in Jordan. Look at it, it's wonderful. And I think that's something that publishers can work on, is trying to find good people who can actually assess the material better for them, yeah?
Yes, yeah, definitely. And people that they can trust. And if that's an issue, as I mentioned earlier, I think, as Robert was saying, just recognizing the value of literature from a place you're not used to. A lot of editors speak French, Spanish, German, and they've grown up, surrounded by wonderful works of European literature, but perhaps are a bit hesitant to take a chance on something from the Arab world because they're not as well versed in that literature. But I think, every editor I've worked with who has accepted something that I've pitched is either because they've traveled to the Middle East. None of them speak Arabic, well, maybe the exception of one. They've traveled to the Middle East, or they have a family member who has a link there, or they've read some work by, an Arab author that they loved. So it's just mainly having an interest, like diversifying your point of view of what literature, what is good literature. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Robert, this takes me to a point that one of our audience members is asking about. We have a few minutes left here. And this is something I had run past, but didn't actually think to ask. I believe it's Hatless that you're bringing into just English rather than French as well, right? What goes into that decision? Why would you're taking the other book, Concrete Mixer, into both English and French, but Hatless only into English, or is it French? Which are you doing?
The explanation is very simple. Yeah. We really wanted to do 2 languages, but English language rights were already sold to another publisher.
So you're going to French with Hatless, but not into English. Great, and would have if you could have. That's
yes,
a very
absolutely.
Good answer. No, that's great. I think we're doing very well. I want to make sure. Let me see if our publisher Hannah has sent me any more questions that I might be missing. Well, this is a good one for you, Sawad, and you've given us some sense of this already. But in our final couple of minutes, let me run this past you. How do you choose? Obviously, you are like Marilyn and like so many, Danny Hahn and all of these wonderful translators I have the privilege to talk to all the time. You are the best advocate of these books out there, because you must carry the torch. You must go into the publishers and say, get this thing, we've got to have it published. How do you choose which ones really speak to you enough to make you that passionate to start making the rounds to the publishers and trying to argue with them, this is really important, let's do it?
So the way that I source the texts that I pitch, they need to be, of a high quality literary, in terms of, I keep an eye on the literary prizes, but also just following the Twitter accounts of authors' works who I really like, and then seeing which sort of what they're reading. Also, there's a very vibrant YouTubing, so booktubing culture in the Arab world, where a lot of young people are, just talking, about books that they love. What I found is Arab authors are very generous with sharing their PDFs if you're considering it for a translation, because getting the actual Arabic book hard copy is almost nearly impossible. I mean, the delivery costs are, sky high, and it takes so long to get here. So if you can just, contact the author directly, they're usually more than happy to send you the PDF.
That's
And
great.
so in terms of choosing a novel, what speaks to me, it has to be something that keeps me turning the pages, and something that helps me, either leaves me with questions, or changes me somehow, whether about how I originally viewed something, or I feel enriched after reading it. And so I find that if I was left with that feeling, then I hope that another reader would be too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that. I think the personal connection is what actually communicates to most readers as well. So the fact
Yeah.
that that's where you start is obviously what's driving your energy in this work, and that's wonderful. In fact, at any moment, you will start hearing from the authors who are watching us now. And then, Robert, you
Yeah.
will hear from Sawad as she comes to you with what the author said.
Okay, you are
We now have a
more than
three-way.
welcome to get in touch with me. I think we have a lot to
Yay.
talk about. Yeah.
Yes, I'm very
Right.
excited.
Well, it's been a wonderful conversation too. I'm sorry that our time is already up. It seems like it just flew right by. I want to thank our audience, particularly for these good questions. I'm pointing here because I see them at that point on my screen. Really fine questions. Sawad, your comments were wonderful. Robert, thank you for so much of a grounding in what you're doing. It's very helpful to hear all of this. Let me remind everyone as we finish up here that we are very close to the end of submissions for this 15th cycle of the Sheikh Zayed Book Award. Thursday, October 1 is the closing date for submissions. And so if you're a publisher, if you are watching and you have something you feel is important and would fit into one of the 9 categories of the award, please do make sure you go to zayedaward.ae and learn about how to make a submission and get in there. Submissions are growing every year. It's just, Dr. Ali keeps telling us, the numbers are rising and rising. It's very exciting. That, of course, is because the Sheikh Zayed Award is becoming better and better known all over the world for the work it's doing in raising so many books to light and helping the rest of us, when translation happens, to be able to enjoy them too. So thank you for your time today, for your comments, both of you, for the audience being with us. We're at publishingperspectives.com. We publish 5 days a week, and we are a free service. Be sure you sign up for our subscription newsletter. Then we can let you know every day what our new stories are. We cover the international trade book industry, and we would love to have you as one of our readers. We're all looking forward to Frankfurt Book Fair. We hope we'll see you there in the digital format. I'm Porter Anderson, editor-in-chief at Publishing Perspectives, and I'd like to thank you again for being with us. Have a good day or evening. Bye-bye.